The Houston Rockets won't give Alperen Sengun a max. The Bulls are putting Nikola Vucevic on the trade market. I've got more potential trade targets that can get the Pelicans their starting center. Plus, Yves Missi is not the next Jaxson Hayes. It's a Wednesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Wednesday, more trade targets trying to find a starting center for the New Orleans Pelicans next season. So we're going to look at the Houston Rockets, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith Jr. Then we're going to switch to the Chicago Bulls because I do think Nikola Vucevic could be had at a pretty cheap price. And I've got an interesting three-team deal that also gives the Pelicans more flexibility in the future. And then we're going to talk about Pelicans rookie Yves Missi in the third segment. So, of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So let's get into it with the trade target. One of the biggest news stories I thought over the past couple of days was the Houston Rockets, maybe not wanting to pay their starting center, Alperen Sengun, a full max. And on the surface, this kind of surprises me because he is good and does a lot of things you want in a modern big man. This is a guy who averaged 21.1 points per game last season, 9.3 rebounds, 5 assists, 1.2 steals, 0.7 blocks, and was just good overall. He also gets to the line a lot for where he is in his career. 21 points on 15.6 shot attempts. That's really good efficiency. He has taken the three in the past, but is not a good three-point shooter. But I think that's something that he has that range and could develop in the future. So let's start with this. Why would they not want to give him a max, and how likely is it that he gets traded? Because when I look at the Houston Rockets, right now he's probably not my #1 trade target because I don't actually think that they're going to look to move him. They might not want to pay him the max, but they don't have to trade him right now. There's a difference between him and, say, Brandon Ingram at the moment, where they each have 1 year left on the deal, except Sengun next season will be a restricted free agent at the end of the year. So the Houston Rockets kind of retain pole position on retaining him, and it's not like he can just walk and go anywhere else. Is there a reason to give Sengun the max right now? Or should they just wait a year and then you can pay it to him then? I don't really see any sort of issue with that sort of move. Make him earn it a little bit more. Maybe it makes him a little bit hungry to go out and play well. And if he does, then you give him a max because he's a restricted free agent and you can do that then. So I don't know if there's really a big need for them to rush to make this move right now. And maybe if you can sign him for a little bit less because he takes it, all the better for you in this sort of scenario. And that's kind of what I see going on. So just because they're not going to sign him to a max right now doesn't mean that I think that they are going to deal him or looking to deal him anytime soon. The knock on him, I do think, is his defense. But I think when you watch him play, and I watched a lot of film over him the past couple of days, you see a guy that in the right defensive scheme is not a defensive liability at all. And I do think New Orleans could play that sort of scheme where, just keep people out of the paint. They've done a very good job of that the past couple of years. Sengun fits right in. And we know that the Houston Rockets want to try and improve. And when you look around the league, them being able to go after a big name, that's drying up a little bit and isn't necessarily going to be the easiest thing for them to do. So it could be a deal where, Brandon Ingram is a more advanced scorer than many players on their roster. Fred VanVleet probably isn't going to be there long term. Maybe going after Brandon Ingram makes a lot of sense. And, not a straight up deal between Ingram and Sengun, but you can construct a trade where that seems to work. But there's another guy on their roster because I don't think they're going to trade Sengun this offseason. Another guy that I think could also be the right move, and that's maybe Jabari Smith Jr. A guy who in that same draft as Paolo Banchero was going to go number 1 overall until Banchero ended up going number 1 overall. Jabari Smith Jr. falls to 3. This is a power forward / center, a guy with good size at 6'11" that can play either position. Played about a third of his minutes last season as the center for the Houston Rockets. 13.7 points per game, 8.1 rebounds, 1.6 assists, 0.7 steals, 0.8 blocks, and he has shown the ability to shoot the 3. He has taken 5 attempts per game in his career so far, which is just 2 seasons, not hitting them at an exceptionally high rate, but in his second year, that number jumped up to 36.3% last season. Through the first 2 years of his career, he's trending in the right direction when it comes to the 3-point shot. And when you get into some of the numbers and things like that, when you look at, Jabari Smith Jr. and where he's playing center has gone overall well. I'm trying to pull up the numbers here so we can look at them. Him as their not starting center, but playing center minutes for them overall was good. The most used lineup with him as a center last year had a positive net rating of 6.4. The defensive rebounding, which is kind of the big concern there, wasn't amazing. But if you put him in a lineup with, DeJounte Murray, with Trae Young, I do think you can get by with the rebounding that you would have out there on the court. He's a buy low candidate, but if you wanted the Houston Rockets to try and upgrade their, starting wing spot, which I think is something they want to do, figuring out a trade with Brandon Ingram for Jabari Smith Jr. and other salary filler makes sense. You could also maybe shed some salary if you're the Pelicans in a deal like this. So I would definitely be going after Jabari Smith Jr., seeing if you can maybe pry him away. I think it's worth keeping in mind that for a long, long time, he was the presumed number 1 overall pick in that draft. Playing center next to Zion Williamson, kind of moving him to that position, something that he's done throughout his career. Again, about a third of his minutes last year were at center. That's an increase from where he was the year before. Seems to make a lot of sense. And he could be that kind of prototypical shooting, spacing big man next to Zion Williamson that we have yet to see. That's a move that I think could be a sneaky smart one for the New Orleans Pelicans. Do you prefer Jabari Smith Jr.? Do you prefer Alperen Sengun? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. But there's another target that I think is much more attainable than either of these guys. And it could be a 3-team deal that nets the Pelicans other flexible pieces too. Let's look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. That involves the Bulls and Nikola Vucevic here. We're going to talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Game Time. It's the summer, and that means Major League Baseball. Maybe you're traveling. Maybe you want to go check out one of the ballparks. Nothing better than sitting outside, hot dog, the nice weather, watching a game. It's a lot of fun. And Game Time is an official ticketing partner of Major League Baseball. So if you're traveling, you want to go check it out, best to do it through Game Time. This is my go-to ticketing app, and it's not just for sporting events, for concerts, theater, comedy, and more. What I love about Game Time is they just make it easy. They take the guesswork out of buying tickets. You can see the view from your seats before you buy, so you won't be surprised when you get to the venue. They also have the all-in pricing up front, no hidden fees, anything like that. There's also the Game Time guarantee. So you get 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen, go listen to Locked On Saints with my man Ross Jackson. I know he's listening to Locked On Pelicans, We're breaking it all down. So is he with everything black and gold, getting you set for training camp, which is like a week or two away. It's going to be here before you know it. Means the season is starting. Make sure Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, is your second listen today. By the way, become an everydayer of Locked On Pelicans. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you are an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. So there was another rumor that was kind of floating around the other day, and this one makes a ton of sense that, look, the Chicago Bulls sound like they're losing DeMar DeRozan for nothing. He's just going to walk and sign elsewhere. Maybe it'll be a sign and trade, maybe not. And the Pelicans don't have an interest in DeMar DeRozan. But that team is starting to fall apart. They've been trying to tread water and just be a play-in tournament team. Hasn't really worked. They need, a definite reset there. So a guy that I think very much could be on the move is going to be Nikola Vucevic, and that makes a ton of sense. This guy still has some legs in him, a little bit older, on the wrong side of 30. He'll be 34 next season. But as a big man that shoots the ball, that can still give you quality production, I think he makes an absolute ton of sense for New Orleans. This is his ninth, 10th season, something like that in the NBA, more than that maybe. 18 points per game last year. 10.5 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 0.7 steals, 0.8 blocks. He did not shoot the three ball well last year, but for his career, he's a 34% shooter from three on over 2.5 attempts per game. The year before last, he was 35%. His first year in Chicago, he was 39% from three. In Orlando, he was a good three-point shooting big man too. There is a lot of potential there for him to be that court spacer next to Zion Williamson. And he's going to be attainable because the Bulls need to make some changes. And his contract is perfect. He's in that same range of making money alongside Jarrett Allen. $20 million next season, $21.48 million the season after that. That's something that New Orleans can take on and maybe have him be a stopgap for a year, 2 years, while hopefully Yves Missi, and more on him in the next segment, develops into the guy that they need him to be and is ready to take on that starting job. And then this money just comes off the books at around a time the Pelicans would absolutely need that money to come off of the books. So Chicago needing a reset and putting Vucevic on the trade block is exactly the type of opportunity New Orleans should try and pounce on, I think. Much more attainable than probably many of the other names that we've talked about outside of Wendell Carter Jr. here as the Pelicans starting center for next season. So this is a guy that wouldn't probably cost a lot. And I do think you end up doing a deal that would be a 3-team trade. And I think a deal with the Sacramento Kings makes a ton of sense here. So here's the trade that I propose. And I think it could work out really well, and everyone would be happy with this. You send Brandon Ingram to the Sacramento Kings. They are very interested in him, but they don't exactly have the pieces we would want. I talked about them on Monday's show about why you could maybe do a deal for Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, and 2 first-round picks. But what if you could just get a player back instead? So it's Brandon Ingram to the Sacramento Kings. The Chicago Bulls receive Harrison Barnes and a future first-round pick from the Sacramento Kings. You're probably not getting that much more for Vucevic here, so I think that makes sense. And then the New Orleans Pelicans get Kevin Huerter and Vucevic and a first-round pick from the Chicago Bulls. So the return is Huerter, which I think would be a rotation piece for New Orleans. Vucevic as your starting center. And then a future first-round pick for you basically to package with Huerter for something else later down the line. That acquires a starting center for the Pelicans and now gives you that future flexibility. Look, they're running into a little bit of trouble right now in terms of money later on this season and what they're going to be able to do. So adding more built-in flexibility I think would be great. If they make a trade with the Sacramento Kings just for Brandon Ingram and for Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter and 2 first-round picks, they're going to just try and flip some of those pieces. You may as well just do it now, get a guy in the building, and you can start kind of prepping and planning the rest of the regular season and the moves you want to make either in training camp or building up to the trade deadline. It replenishes a little bit of the draft capital that you gave up in the trade for DeJounte Murray, who, by the way, there are pictures of him already wearing New Orleans Pelicans gear, which I absolutely love to see. He seemed excited to be coming here. That's the type of attitude that's going to get you loved in this city and by this fan base. You did have a heartfelt note from Larry Nance Jr. too, which I thought was also really nice. So, all of a sudden your starting lineup would be something like DeJounte Murray, then CJ McCollum, one of Trey Murphy or Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, and then Vucevic. It's a pretty good starting lineup. Vuce can then play however many minutes you need him to. It provides a clear role for a guy like Yves Missi, who we're going to talk about in the next segment here. And I think that helps with player development. It gives you a different kind of big to bring in off the bench. You could trade Kevin Huerter and a first-round pick for some more front court depth, which I think could be a good thing. Or you just kind of keep him not as the Najee Marshall replacement, but shooting on the wing. You wouldn't need to have a guy like Matt Ryan on the team. You could cut him to save some salary or trade him for something else. It opens up just like a ton of different possibilities, I think, for the New Orleans Pelicans and gives them more flexibility, which is something they're lacking a little bit of right now. We don't want to see a final roster, I think, going into next season where they just don't have any ability to make other moves. We have an idea of what this team will look like, what their strengths are going to be, what their weaknesses are going to be, but you're bringing in and dramatically overhauling the roster, which means there's going to be some growing pains. Some weaknesses might present themselves later that you want to try and address. Having the flexibility to do that, I think, is a really important thing. So I like this trade. A starting center, a depth piece, and a first-round pick in exchange for Brandon Ingram is the type of deal that I think really, really works here. You'd maybe like more coming back for Ingram, but I think this is the type of deal, looking at the market and knowing that contract situation for Brandon Ingram is dragging down some of his value. This is probably what you're going to be looking at. I tried to find a way you could maybe send Zach LaVine to the Sacramento Kings and maybe Ingram to the Bulls, but I don't think that trade exactly works. I think this is the type of 3-team deal that would make an absolute ton of sense and something that New Orleans is probably going to be on the phone about. I don't know if it'll end up happening. I do worry about Vuce's age a little bit. I don't love the idea of trading Brandon Ingram for not a long-term piece, and that's not how I view Vucevic in this situation. So there's that when it comes to it, but I do think the fit could be there. He's a good rebounder too. Like beyond just the shooting, he is a very good rebounder. Not as elite as Jonas Valanciunas was, but I don't think he's actually horribly far off. He's a little more lumbering than you would like, so he's not that mobile, switchy center, hyper athletic center they want on the perimeter. But there's more shooting here, and I think the fit just makes a little bit more sense. Does that mean it's the right move? Probably not. Is this the type of guy that Willie Green would totally love? No, he's not a defensive anchor, anything like that. But I don't think you're necessarily going to find that unless you get a guy like Jared Allen or Miles Turner. And there's no reason to believe, despite the fact that, the Indiana Pacers just signed James Wiseman to be the third string center. That's why you don't want him to be the starting center for you. That maybe it means Turner's on the move. I don't know. I just don't see Turner going anywhere because their options for their starting center then are not great. So I think this is maybe what you would be looking at if you're the New Orleans Pelicans. So coming up, let's switch it up. We've talked a lot of trades the past couple of days. Let's get back to the draft. Yves Missi, he's not the next Jaxson Hayes. I get why people are saying that, and I said the boom or bust potential is kind of there, but from talking to people around him, from around the Pelicans too, a lot of my concerns with that got eased away. And I'll explain why. And it has something to do with a very good quality in Missi that probably isn't talked about enough. Let's break that down coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans here. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below because I truly appreciate y'all. Now, for your second listen, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? Do you have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the yelling. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, news, and opinions, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about the draft. Yves Missi, the Pelicans' first-round pick, 21 overall. Wasn't the guy that I would have drafted. Deron Holmes was probably the guy that I would have gone after in that type of situation. Learning more about Kyle Filipowski's weird situation does worry me a little bit with that, though I'm still surprised he dropped out of the first round. But I think he would have made sense as a guy that could play right away for this team. But the Pelicans went with Yves Missi, and beyond just the athletic attributes. And like I said, other guys I liked better is what makes me concerned about this, that Missi is a very, very, very raw prospect. He's only picked up basketball recently, coming over from Cameroon to basically be a basketball player here. One of the things, though, that I think when you look at these guys who kind of have these rapid ascents like that is, what's their work ethic like? And so I think that people look at Yves Missi and go, okay, he's a hyper-athletic big man that is very, very raw and is going to take some time to develop. Reminds them of Jaxson Hayes in that same draft with Zion Williamson, and that understandably gives people a lot of concern and pause. And I get it, but I don't think these two players are remotely alike at all, and that gives me a lot of hope for Missi's future here in New Orleans. Jaxson Hayes, I think particularly from watching him in his 4 years here in New Orleans, did he truly want to be an NBA player, or did he enjoy being an NBA player? Is he a hooper, or is he a guy that just wanted the contract, the fame, the notoriety that came with being in the NBA? And it feels more like the latter. Was he truly in love with the game or something like that? And I think the answer is probably no. Yves Missi isn't like that at all. One of the things that I've gathered from talking to everyone with him is a couple of things. One, he's a hyper intelligent person, not just a basketball player, but overall, just as a human, is very, very smart. Absorbs things quickly, can process things quickly, and can go out and kind of learn those and put them into practice very quickly. For a player who you need to develop, that's a very, very, very good quality, and maybe one of the number one things you want to kind of have with them. Missi definitely has that. The other part is the work ethic, right? Was Jaxson Hayes putting in the extra work, or was he going to be taking Instagram pictures and posting them? Missi's the type of player that is going to put in the work. The work ethic is something that everyone has raved about when it comes to him. That's what you want in a rookie, a guy that's going to come in, put in the work, and then try and just get better from all of that. That's why I don't think he's anything like Jaxson Hayes. They also have different body types and are different types of players. Jaxson Hayes needed to put on more muscle. You don't necessarily see that from Missi. He has an NBA-ready body. So I don't view them the same. I get why, I and others might jump to that sort of conclusion or make that comparison. But when you dive into it a little bit more, that's not going to be the case whatsoever. I think the biggest thing for him is the Pelicans having a clear development plan for him, knowing how to use him his rookie year, making sure he does get some minutes, and looking at the correct things to work on with him. One of the things they tried to do was turn Jaxson Hayes into a shooter, not into a rim protector, not into a rebounder, but into a shooter. And I get it, but they often did that by just having him be in the short corner, trying to be that that corner three anchor, and that's not the right role for him. If they're doing something like that with Yves Missi, they're doing it wrong. He should be a pick and roll lob threat for this team, and so I hope they're going to start working with him on how to set good screens, how to roll well to the rim, those sorts of things. If you develop him properly, something that, look, Jaxson has a lot of culpability, the majority of it, in the way his career has gone, but the Pelicans have some blame in that too. And so if you can come up with the right development plan for Yves Missi, knowing that what his work ethic is, how smart he is, this is a guy that I think could absolutely flourish and maybe develop sooner rather than later for this team and provide more of an immediate impact. You teach him how to defend, teach him how to stay vertical, which is my big concern with him, defending without fouling down low. If they can figure that out and plan for that, he's going to be a very strong defender in the NBA and will carve out a role for himself at the very least. You add in the other things, being a role man, using him in the right way when he's out there on the court. That's the biggest thing. He's going to be willing to do whatever you want him to do, and I think he'll pick up all of those things exceptionally quickly. And that's, I think, a big reason why the Pelicans drafted him. I think they learned from a lot of their mistakes when it came to drafting Jaxson Hayes and how they brought him along and what they did with him and how they used him. That's really encouraging, I think, for this team and what they want to do with Missi, and why I'm really starting to kind of come around on this pick. There were guys that could have contributed a little bit more right away as a rookie, yes. But now that you still have Brandon Ingram and you could trade him, you don't need Missi to play minutes right away necessarily. So you didn't need to draft a Kyle Filipowski or someone else like that who was maybe more NBA ready than Missi is, if you think Missi has the tools to develop into something greater than those other players drafted after him. And that's where this pick starts to make a ton more sense, I think. Let me know what you think. Have you come around on the Yves Missi pick? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Are you optimistic about how he's going to play in the NBA this year and what his role would be? Because I really am. And watching him more and hearing more about him, he's not going to be Jaxson Hayes at all. I feel very confident in saying that if for whatever reason his career doesn't go how we would hope it would be, it has nothing to do with the work ethic or something like that, because I think that's going to be through the roof with this guy. And I'm excited that he's on the Pelicans team, bringing that energy here, because sometimes they need some more of that. Let me know if you agree, disagree in the comments down below on YouTube. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow. Maybe we'll do a live show or something like that. See y'all then.